No-less. Let's do it. This is a W. Sound like Monty Booker drums. All right. W's in the chat, W's in the chat, W's in the chat, W's in the chat. Reggie, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about it?
I liked it. It was a nice vibe. I like the thinned out start, classic. Really good, easy vibe. And I especially like the ending, actually, the way it thinned out and kind of, you heard a little bit more of the beatbox in there. That was pretty sick. It's a real good, nice, chill, laid back groove.
Reggie says the more you hear him, the better. First place for you, No-less. We're keeping you in first place. First place for you.
No less.
No, we expect no less out of you.
We expect no less. I'm a beginning beatboxer, and this is a new beatbox.
Hey, what up everyone? It's No-less, and I'm going to be breaking down the beat I made for the battle with Reggie Watts. And you guys saw the sample, and essentially what I did to chop up the sample is I took little clicks that Reggie made and sort of merged it together to create this sort of groove. And that's essentially what I did for most of it, and then at some point I would bring in a little bit more like this. And then by the end, I bring in the most of that, the little humming part that Reggie Watts does. I also ended up using stereo delay on part of the sample. I panned it to the right with the stereo delay to make it more fuller, and it sounded like this. And without it, it just sounded like... So in my opinion, I think it just sounds better when it's more spread out. It kind of gives a more fuller feel and kind of covers the entire atmosphere. One thing to also note about the sample is that I cut the frequencies at the low mid line to sort of remove the lower frequencies and keep the higher frequencies so it sounded less cluttered, and I could leave room for the low one for the kick and bass. So to accompany the sample chops, I added a lot of like percs and drums, and I will show all of you what that sounds like right here. And this is what the drums sound like all together. So you can see that I didn't get some of the things in the final cut, like this shaker. I took out some of the breaths. Some of these weren't used later on. It's kind of just to keep variation throughout the track. Let's talk about some of the things I did with the percs. So for this pop sound, I panned it a little bit to the left. For this snare sound, pan it to the left as well a little bit. This table perk sound, I actually didn't use any of the panning on this menu right here. Instead, I went to Fruity Reverb 2. I put up all the wet level, decrease the dry level, put the decay time the lowest possible, and increase the room size, as well as removed all of the diffusion. So it makes this sort of triangle shape right here on the display, and it gets this weird sound with it. I also added stereo delay to some of the elements, such as when I used this mouth pop right here to sort of put it throughout all parts of the ears rather than just monotone. So you get this sort of sound, and also with the breaths. Otherwise, it would sort of just sound kind of boring and just monotone and centered. Regarding the bass, I took the bass from Cascade Volume 1, and I increased the time stretch a little bit and put the mode on stretch so it hit all the bass notes would hit the same, and it just sounds like this. Now we can move on to the melodies, and most of it was used with the stock plugin 3x Oscillator, and the only paid for plugins was Serum and Synplant. And for the main parts of the melody, I used attack chords that are pretty straightforward. It goes like this. To make these chords in 3x Oscillator, I had two sine waves. I set both the chorus pitches to 24 or plus 0, and there's a noise knob that was up 2% along with a stereo phase randomness that was 38%. And for the volume envelope, I made the attack knob 25%. And this decay knob here really doesn't matter because I end it before the decay can even happen. So for the second parts of the main melody, I have these chords right here, which sound like this. And to make these chords, I have it generally the same as the first 3x Oscillator version, except I don't have a noise knob going on, and I have a small envelope that occurs. Also for the sine wave chords, I brought out Fruity Delay 3 to help create that big crush effect, and to do that, I reduced the sample rate a little bit and the feedback level entirely. And also I reduced the time entirely so that when the note hits, there's no delay occurring and the big crush happens immediately. So as another part of the melody, I have this little flute part that delays itself, and I used Synplant to make this. And essentially in Synplant, I made a sine wave chord or a sine wave sound with a small noise filter on it, and in the song it sounds like this. And you might notice that the note is a little tiny bit delayed, but that isn't to play the note exactly right there. Instead, it's delayed a little tiny bit forward in some cases, and that's because I have to compensate for the reverb that occurs when I have it only wetness, because then it doesn't play the dry note immediately. And essentially for the reverb, I increase this room size a tiny bit, and the diffusion stays the same, and the decay is all the way at 0. And this makes sure that the sound is in the background rather than the foreground, as like a little accompanied element. In the middle of the beat, I had this little lead part that happens for 8 measures, and it sounds like this. What I did is I used Serum, and I just had the bass saw wave basically, and I put the unison to 16, the detune to 0.03, added a tiny bit of attack so it doesn't click at the beginning, and a little bit of release. For the effects, I have the hyper knob on, hyper dimension knob, and I have the mix on for the hyper a little bit. I think I kept these at its default, but I'm not really too sure, like the rate and the detune. And then I adjusted like the mix and the size for the dimension a little bit. And without it, it would sound like this. So with this hyper and dimension knob, I think it sounds a lot cleaner, and it has that little like extra detune added to it. While that synth lead is playing, I have this little part that goes like this. To make the sound, I had another sine wave that generally had the same settings as the other ones with a little bit of attack, and if you can't tell already, I love sine waves. And moving on to the effects for it, I had just a little bit of delay with the leveling turned down a little lower and the wetness turned down lower, along with a little bit of stereo imaging. Along with that delay, I have a small reverb part where the decay is decreased to the lowest, the size is the same. It's basically its default settings except for the wetness being at 100% and the dryness is at 0. And I have a small automation clip that occurs right here where so after the delay occurs, the reverb occurs with it. So it sounds like this. By the end of the song, I have long sine wave chords that just play like this. I essentially stole the same chord pattern that I used at the beginning of the song, but when it comes to making the actual sine wave itself, it's almost the same except the volume envelope is up only a tiny bit for the attack, and for the pitching, I have an envelope for when it starts the chord. So when it hits the chord, it sounds like this, and you can hear a small gradual pitch up, but without it, it just goes straight forward and plays the note itself like this. So it's just like a nice little touch to add to it. And also on top of the envelope, I have an LFO knob that automates the pitching as the chord plays with 31% attack and a really small amount of variation, so you can hear that little wavering. With those long sine wave chords, I also have this little part that's the same flute that's used at the beginning of the song, but it's just up in octave, so it's like this. By the end of the song, I take out all of the kick and the bass to draw the attention more toward the sample. And of course, at the beginning of the song, there's that nice little reverb part as an intro, which sounds like this. To make this reverb part, I took basically, you can see this cut right here. I took this first 4 bars of the actual song and I made it into one consolidated clip and I put it on a mixer track and then just added fruity reverb where I took out all the wetness, the decay, made the room size small, which is 35 here, and the diffusion is still the same. The dampness I turned up a little bit as well, and it gets that sort of sound. And by the end of this consolidated clip, I have a tape stop that occurs right here. You can hear right now. And with that, I have chords that lead into the main pattern that sound like this. You might have noticed that I didn't use a pitching automation clip to make that lead-in for the main chords. And instead of doing that, I took the first chord of the main pattern and I took the chord and put it down 2 steps and then made a slide that goes up 2 steps so that all the notes go up together. So it would just sound like that. When it comes to the mixing, you can see that I really didn't change much, and it's not because everything sounds the same volume and it just perfectly mixed as it is. Instead, what I like to do is I mix on the go using the menu with these that's associated with the sound rather than on the mixer. It's really sort of random. Like right here, you can see that I brought down the volumes entirely for the beatbox sample and also for the synth-plant. There's really nothing to it. It's just sort of random, like a thing that I like to do. Also, one thing to note is that I actually didn't put all the sounds onto the mixer track, and I only have a select few of them for at least the percs. But I do have all the melodies, and that's just because of time constraints. Generally, I'd put probably all of the percs onto here and maybe mess with the EQs a lot more. And yeah. On the master, it's really just a soft clipper. At least when I made it, I literally had, I think, probably 4 or 3 minutes left before I had to submit. So I didn't really have time to do anything to the master because I really wanted to make sure I got the submission in. So I just had a soft clipper and I just submitted as it is, and it was pretty quiet. But by the end, I sort of just had like a parametric EQ that took a little bit of the low ends and increased it a tiny bit, and I really didn't bother going through too much with the master here, probably out of laziness, but it sounds fine as it is, I'd say. As a final note, I'd like to say thank you to basically everyone. Thank you to Kenny Beats for hosting these battles and giving us hours of entertainment, endless hours of entertainment, and also being so generous to give us such expensive gifts and really help us with our music journey. And even though you can be harsh sometimes, it really it's really nice to know that you really care about our growth in music. Also, shout out to all the people that supported me along the way, especially those in the Memblem community, and other communities such as OK Sammy's or Young Teams and others. In general, I didn't think I was going to get this far or get up this far this fast. A funny thing is that right before the battle, I was sort of skeptical of myself, and I was thinking, oh, it's just going to be a practice battle, and even like 30 minutes in, I was telling a friend that the submission is probably going to be sort of just a practice to test the waters for future battles. And I somehow managed to pull through and create this beat in such little time. And I really didn't think I would be able to do it, especially since this is my first time trying the battle. And that's impressive in itself. But shout out to everyone who really liked the beat and told me and, really wanted this beat breakdown. It really makes me feel like I'm actually doing something really well with my music. So thank you guys so much. And for real though, thank you, Kenny, for all the things that you do. Now I'll just play the beat out for you guys. So I'll see y'all later.